All right, so today we're diving deep into ancient Egypt,
Okay.
but it's not going to be just like a regular history lesson, you know?
Right.
We're not just going to be
Right.
like memorizing pharaohs and pyramids.
Yeah, yeah.
It's more about like, their empire and how it kind of fell apart.
Right.
And what's interesting is that there are actually lessons from that
Yeah,
that we can apply to like our lives today. So
absolutely.
we're talking about, leadership economics, like the whole
It's
shebang.
all connected.
Yeah. And you gave me a bunch of really interesting sources to look at for this one.
I did.
Like I saw some books in there, some
Give
articles.
some think pieces.
Yeah, so hopefully we can kind of like connect those dots and,
Yeah, definitely.
see what we find.
I think a good place to start is this. Ancient Egypt, even when it was at its best, like even at its peak, there were already signs that things were kind of like,
Oh, really?
yeah, like little cracks were already showing.
Interesting.
And it reminds me of that saying, what is it? The greatest enemy of a good plan is the dream of a perfect plan.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that one.
It's like they were so busy being like, we're ancient Egypt, we're amazing,
Right.
that they missed some red flags.
Yeah, it's like they got stuck in their ways while the rest of the world was changing.
Exactly.
I remember in one of those articles you sent, I think it was that one about like ancient civilizations and adaptability.
Right.
It talked about how Egypt's power structures were so rigid
Yeah.
that it made it almost impossible for them to change with the times.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
was like they were this giant ship
Okay.
trying to make a shark turn in a bathtub.
Gotcha.
They couldn't be flexible. Like
Right.
their traditions, their worldview, everything was so ingrained.
And they were like, this is how we do things.
Exactly.
And that inflexibility really put them in the behind when new powers came onto the scene.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It wasn't just internal stuff that brought them down. You had these other empires like the Hittites, the Assyrians,
Right.
even Alexander the Great eventually.
Wow, so they were getting it from all sides.
Yeah, they were used to being top dog.
Right.
And they didn't really have a game plan for when things got shaky.
It's like they were trying to play by the old rules when everyone else was like rewriting the rule book.
You got it.
And that actually reminds me of this article you sent. I think it was about geopolitical strategy or something.
Okay, yeah.
And it compared ancient civilizations to like modern businesses.
Uh-huh.
And it said that Egypt was like a company that was so focused on its past successes
Right.
that it totally missed the boat on innovation.
And then what happens?
They get overtaken by these smaller, more adaptable competitors.
Exactly. It's a perfect analogy.
It is. And I think that's such a good lesson for all of us. Like, no matter what we're doing in life,
Right.
we got to keep our eyes on the horizon.
You got to be scanning the environment.
Exactly. Like, are there new technologies we should be aware of?
New trends.
Yeah. New anything. Really?
It's about being proactive, not reactive.
Totally. And speaking of proactive, let's talk about some of those internal struggles that were brewing within Egypt.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just external pressure that weakened them.
No, it was like a 1-2 punch.
There was a lot going on beneath the surface.
For sure. And, you had highlighted this one passage
Yeah.
about the nomarchs.
Oh, right. The local governors.
Yeah, exactly. And they were gaining more and more power.
Which I guess isn't ideal when you're a pharaoh trying to run an empire.
Not at all. Imagine a kingdom where the pharaoh is losing control. And these ambitious regional leaders are more interested in their own little kingdoms.
Oh, man, that sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was. It's like that time you told me about with that work project.
Oh, no, which one?
The one where the team was so busy fighting among themselves
Yeah.
that they completely forgot about the client.
Oh, right. Yeah. No, that was not good.
And that's basically what happened in ancient Egypt.
So they're dealing with these outside threats.
The Hittites, the Assyrians, you name it.
Right.
And at the same time, their government is weakening.
And everyone's fighting for power,
Exactly. It was a mess.
like a house divided.
Perfectly said.
And that lack of unity internally made them super vulnerable to those outside forces.
Oh, absolutely. It's like trying to fight a war on two fronts.
Right.
You're bound to lose.
Exactly. But you know what else is important?
What's that?
Money.
Ah, yes.
The lifeblood of any society.
And ancient Egypt's economic story is a wild ride.
Oh, you can say that again. Beyond the pyramids and the gold, they were dealing with some serious financial challenges.
Really? I always thought of them as being super wealthy.
They were for a time. But remember that article you shared about resource management?
Yeah, I think I highlighted like half of that one.
It's so relevant here because they put all their eggs in one basket.
Oh, you're talking about the Nile.
Exactly. Their
Wow.
entire agricultural system depended on it.
Which makes sense, but also seems kind of risky.
It was, if the Nile flooded too much or too little, it was a huge problem for them.
Wow, so they were at the mercy of nature.
Pretty much. And then there were those massive building projects. Oh, right, the pyramids.
Exactly. Those things weren't cheap.
I bet. They're huge.
Huge, and they took a ton of resources to build.
So they were pouring money into these projects.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And while they're impressive, they also diverted resources away from other important things.
Well, that makes sense. It's all about balance, right?
Exactly. And to make matters worse, as their power declined, they started losing control of important trade routes.
Oh, no. So they're losing money because they can't trade as much.
Exactly. It was a recipe for economic disaster.
Wow. It's like everything that could go wrong did go wrong.
It's a cautionary tale.
It is.
Yeah.
But, it's not all about politics and economics.
Right.
There's also the whole cultural side of things.
Oh, absolutely. And the cultural transformations during ancient Egypt's decline are incredibly relevant today, especially in our globalized world.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like think about it. You've been researching how to navigate cultural differences in your own work, right?
Yeah.
Well, here we have an ancient civilization grappling with the same thing.
Wow. That's wild. So what happened? Like, how did they deal with these changes?
Well, it's actually a pretty interesting story. So as new powers like the Greeks and later the Romans entered the picture, they brought their own languages, customs, ways of life, you name it.
It's like history rhyming, isn't it?
It really is. And you have to wonder, did the ancient Egyptians embrace these changes? Or did they resist? It was a bit of both, actually. Like in one of your history books, it talks about Alexandria during the Ptolemaic dynasty, and it describes it as this amazing mix of cultures.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like Egyptian and Greek cultures all blended together.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, it was a time of like huge intellectual and artistic exchange.
So they were learning from each other.
Exactly. But I'm sure not every Egyptian was thrilled about it, you know?
Right. Like, imagine if someone just waltzed in and started changing everything you knew.
Exactly. It reminds me of that project you told me about.
The one with the teams from different countries?
Yeah, that one. Where you had to like integrate everyone.
Oh, yeah. That was a tough one. Let me tell you.
Lots of cultural differences to navigate.
A ton. And it took a lot of work to find that common ground.
Exactly. And it sounds like ancient Egypt went through something similar. They had to balance preserving their own identity while also adapting to all these new influences.
It's like walking a tightrope.
Totally. And it really makes you think about how we handle those same tensions today.
Right. Like globalization and all.
Exactly. It's like in that book you recommended.
The one about the psychology of globalization.
Yeah, that one. It talked about being open to new ideas, but also holding on to your own values.
Finding that balance.
Exactly. Which brings us to the leaders at the heart of all this change, the pharaohs.
Oh, yeah. They weren't just kings, right?
Nope. They were considered divine.
Like gods on earth.
Exactly. Can you imagine the pressure?
I can't even imagine, like, the weight of an entire civilization on your shoulders.
And not just any civilization, one that believes you're a god king.
Whoa. So how did they handle that? Like, were they good leaders?
It really depended on the pharaoh. In the early days, you had some really strong ones, like Thutmose III, Ramses II. They used their power to expand the empire. They brought stability, left behind incredible legacies.
So they lived up to the hype.
They did. They understood that their power came with a huge responsibility.
But then it sounds like things went downhill.
Well, as Egypt started to decline, many of the later pharaohs kind of dropped the ball.
What do you mean?
Well, instead of tackling the challenges head on, they became more concerned with staying in power and, living lavish lifestyles.
So they got greedy.
Pretty much. And they lost sight of what really mattered, serving their people.
And that disconnect probably just made those internal struggles even worse.
Oh, absolutely. When people feel like their leader doesn't care about them, it creates resentment, instability. The whole system starts to crumble.
It's like that saying, a fish rots from the head down.
Exactly. And it's a timeless lesson in leadership.
It is. It's
Yeah.
about remembering that true power comes from service.
Well said. It's about integrity vision, a genuine desire to make a difference.
And it's not just for pharaohs either, right?
Not at all. It applies to all of us.
Like, think about the leaders you admire.
The ones who inspire you.
Yeah, the ones who lead with authenticity and empathy.
Exactly. They genuinely care about the people they serve.
That's what makes them great leaders.
Exactly. And makes you wonder, with all these challenges, internal conflicts, external threats, cultural shifts, questionable leadership, how did ancient Egypt survive as long as it did?
That is a good question. Where's the resilience in all of this?
Right.
Like, even with all that you were saying about the decline, they still left behind this incredible legacy.
Yeah, they left a mark on the world.
Yeah, their architecture, even like their math and astronomy stuff.
Totally. It still blows my mind that they knew so much about the stars back then.
Right. And it's still influencing us today.
It really is. And that says a lot about their resilience.
Definitely. Like they could have just crumbled in the face of all those challenges.
Right, that they didn't. Their culture lived on.
And it spread. It's like you were saying earlier about cultural transmission.
Yeah, even though their political power faded, their culture had this lasting impact.
It's like their story didn't end. It just kind of transformed.
That's a good way to put it. They found ways to adapt and even thrive.
And that's a powerful lesson for us.
It is, because the world's always changing.
Always. And if we just cling to the past.
We're going to get left behind.
Exactly.
Mm.
So what's the secret? How do we become more resilient?
Well, it's not about ignoring the hard stuff.
Right.
It's about facing those challenges head on, learning from them, adapting, even reinventing ourselves if we have to.
So it's not about avoiding change. It's about embracing it.
Exactly. And that's what ancient Egypt really shows us. Decline doesn't have to be the end.
You can be a new beginning. I
Exactly.
love that. So as we wrap up our ancient Egypt deep dive, what are your top takeaways for our listeners?
Let's see.
Like, what are the nuggets of wisdom that we can all use in our lives?
Well, I'd say the biggest one is adaptability.
Makes sense.
Remember how we were talking about Egypt's rigid power structure?
Yeah, how they couldn't adapt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a cautionary tale.
Don't be like Egypt
Right. We've got to be open to change.
in all parts of life.
Exactly. Work, relationships, everything.
It's like that company you always talk about.
The one that reinvented itself like 3 times?
Yeah, they were like the masters of adaptation.
Exactly. And they came out stronger each time.
So be more like that company.
Right. But it's not just about external change either.
Oh yeah, what about internal stuff?
Well, ancient Egypt is a good reminder that internal conflicts can be just as damaging.
Oh yeah, we talked about that. Like how they were so divided internally.
Exactly. And it made them super vulnerable.
Like that project you told me about.
The one where the team was always fighting.
Yeah, that was a mess.
Totally. It's so important to build strong relationships.
To work together.
Exactly, because we're stronger together than we are apart.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And you know what else ancient Egypt teaches us about?
What's that?
Leadership.
Oh, yeah. The pharaohs.
Right. They really highlight how important good leadership is.
And how damaging bad leadership can be.
Totally. It's like that quote, a fish rots from the head down.
It's so true. And it's not just about being in charge.
It's about serving something bigger than yourself.
Exactly. It's about integrity.
Yeah.
Vision, responsibility.
And empathy.
Yes. Listening to the people you lead, understanding their needs.
That's what makes a great leader.
Couldn't agree more.
So basically what we've learned today is that history isn't just boring stuff.
Right. It's not just dates and names.
It's about these timeless lessons.
that we can still apply to our lives today.
Exactly. And ancient Egypt is a perfect example of that.
Totally. Even though it declined and eventually disappeared, it still has so much to teach us.
About adaptability,
Unity,
leadership,
it's all connected.
and it's all still relevant today.
Absolutely.
Wow. What a journey this has been.
It really has been fascinating.
I've learned so much.
Me too. And you know what's amazing to me?
What's that?
Is that even though ancient Egypt faced so many challenges, they still left behind this incredible legacy. It's a reminder that even in the face of decline and uncertainty,
There's always hope.
exactly, there's always the potential for renewal.
And for creating something that lasts.
Well said.
Wow. I think that's a perfect note to end on.
I agree.
So thank you to everyone for joining us on this deep dive into ancient Egypt.
Thanks for having me.
It was a pleasure as always. And until next time, keep exploring. Keep questioning.
And keep learning from the past.
Beautifully said. See you all next time.